big tech's bid for one-party rule could result in it getting regulated to death. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. DailyTorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about social media companies, so-called big tech, and censorship, and what's happening on the internet right now. Where it appears that conservatives, Republicans, Christians are being censored on big tech social media company websites like Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, and people are starting to wonder, does this mean that you need regulation? We show Elizabeth Warren here. She's actually calling for Google to be split up, and there's a lot of reporting going on right now. It's not just Elizabeth Warren, but others who are making this case. This is Wall Street Journal, Google's enemies gear up to make antitrust case. Competitors are readying documents and data in anticipation of meetings with the Justice Department. So in addition to those who are being politically censored on these websites, you have small businesses or smaller businesses who believe that these companies are engaged in anti-competitive activities that are harming business and might violate antitrust law. Now, how powerful are these websites, or what is their saturation? A Pew report found 68% of adult Americans are on Facebook, and that amounts to about 170 million people. 24% use Twitter. That comes out to 61 million. And so forth. A separate Pew report found that 73% or 185 million Americans use broadband internet. And so so basically a huge majority of adults are on the internet, and they're utilizing these platforms to communicate with friends, family. People carry on businesses using these websites. And so it certainly invokes laws to do with commerce. And it also affects political organizations or parties or nonprofits like Americans for Limited Government. We use social media. But we're starting to, people are starting to become alarmed because they feel like that these websites are engaged in censorship and they're favoring one party over the other. So you have examples like James Wood. He had tweets removed from Twitter that were his political commentaries, and he says he's not going to participate in Twitter until free speech is allowed. You have YouTube, which is owned by Google, revoked ads from Steven Crowder until he stops linking to his so-called homophobic t-shirts. Okay. Candace Owens had her Facebook page removed, but then it was restored after the suspension, and Facebook had to claim that it was an error, that this was happening. Elsewhere, you see Project Veritas just came out with a video that shows how the algorithms that produce Google search results and other machine learning that Google products use are programmed with algorithmic fairness in mind to prevent, per an internal 2017 Google document that James O'Keefe posted with the video. They're trying to prevent, quote, unjust or prejudicial treatment of people that is related to sensitive characteristics. Now, they mention race, income, sexual orientation, or gender through algorithmic systems or algorithmically aided decision making. Now, as it relates to others, I think if you throw in political affiliation, philosophy, or religion, and you can immediately recognize how Republicans, conservatives, or Christians are also feeling marginalized on social media platforms. Now, in 2018, Google followed up with a public study on algorithmic fairness, a qualitative exploration of perceptions of algorithmic fairness. And they basically did a focus group, and they looked at how the algorithms that, for example, in search results, affect your views of either yourself or the product that you're using. And it said, but they didn't look at people who were privileged, like. Quote, due to our focus on traditionally marginalized populations, we did not gather data about how more privileged populations think about or experience algorithmic unfairness or fairness. So now the Google executive in the Project Veritas video on an undercover camera stated, quote, communities who are in power and have traditionally been in power are not who I'm concerned about solving fairness for. So they want to solve, there is unfairness on websites like Google, but they're not concerned about solving it for privileged communities. And I don't know that Republicans, conservatives, or Christians really feel privileged right now, particularly on social media. I think they feel like they're being treated unfairly. In media publications, they feel like they get a raw deal, that there's a disproportionate representation of left-wing or liberal or, viewpoints in media. And now that's being reflected in social media as well. And so it starts to add up, and then people say, wow, I'm feeling marginalized. So if you looked at these other groups, if they had looked at it, I think they'd find that it makes people feel the same way regardless of what their background is. The 2018 study on the public perceptions of algorithmic fairness stated that, quote, in addition to their concerns about potential harms to themselves and society, participants also indicated that algorithmic fairness, or lack thereof, could substantially affect their trust in a company or product. And, quote, when participants perceived companies were protecting them from unfairness or discrimination, it greatly enhanced user trust and strengthened their relationships with those companies. So when you harm people or you discriminate against them, then they feel aggrieved. But when you protect them, they feel like they can trust you. So now these social media companies, they're going after conservatives, and people are saying, I don't trust you. You're censoring us. Why are you doing that? What is this, a bid for one-party rule? So the question becomes, what responsibility does big tech have to foster our way of life and our competitive system of representative government, if any? And I would argue they have just as much responsibility to basically support our competitive representative republic with the competitive political parties and open discourse, as much as they feel the need to protect marginalized groups historically. I think, and the real question is, why make enemies? It's provocative. Now, many solutions are being proposed. Maybe the social media companies have noticed that suddenly there's this uptick in calls for regulation of big tech firms. There's the Federal Communications Commission route, FCC, which might seek to make public utilities out of big tech companies. And all the regulation that comes with that. So net neutrality springs to mind, although that really seemed to be about throttling speeds on account of how much data was used. And these more contemporary concerns have to do with content-based censorship. But there it is, FCC. They could be declared public utilities. We've noted Elizabeth Warren. She wants to basically break up the big tech firms. And she has a pretty strong statement here. As these companies have grown larger and more powerful, she says, quote, and they have used their resources and control over the way we use the internet to squash small businesses and innovation, and substitute their own financial interests to the broader interests of the broader interests of the American people. And, quote, to restore the balance of power in our democracy, to promote competition, and to ensure that the next generation of technology innovation is vibrant as the last, it's time to break up our biggest tech companies. So, by pushing for one-party rule, by censoring conservatives, are Facebook, Google, Twitter, YouTube, are they ensuring that somebody like Elizabeth Warren is going to get elected and then break up big tech? I think that's a really good question. Maybe these tech firms should reconsider their approach. Maybe a competitive system with open discourse. There might be some people around who want to protect them. Right now, if you were to ask Republicans, what do you think about Elizabeth Warren and breaking up big tech firms? A lot of them are going to shrug and be like, well, gee, normally I would be against that, but now they're censoring people. So suddenly it becomes an existential matter of survival. Everyone's using social media nowadays. Everyone wants to turn up in Google search results. Everyone's got businesses and organizations to promote. Americans for Limited Government, we're on social media. We use Facebook. We use YouTube here. And you're watching this video. It's on YouTube. And so there's no, we depend on that. If these companies were to suddenly shut us down, we might not be around for much longer. Who's going to want to donate to an organization that has no means of communication? And you can see how this could become dangerous. So, for example, we have websites, but what if the web hosting companies start policing content? What if the people who are responsible for DNS resolution suddenly start saying, let's censor websites on our internet browsers, and we'll prevent people from seeing them? Would that is that really gonna? I mean, doesn't that harm our system of our way of life? We depend upon competition and a free and open internet. And now it seems like we're losing the free and open internet. And so people are going to start to become alarmed by that. And I think rightly so. So Elizabeth Warren wants to go antitrust. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is also being invoked. People want to take away the liability protections that interactive computer services have. So this is where users go onto their systems and are posting stuff freely, but there could be defamatory statements and things like that. And these internet companies could lose their liability protection. That would destroy the internet. Suddenly people can't communicate with one another. Nobody's going to want to host somebody else's content that they can't vouch for. Is that accurate? Is that gonna be defamatory? So that's one route that's being called for. Some people call for boycotts. I don't think boycotts are effective. Plus, Republicans should be talking to independents and undecided voters. And if they're not going to be able to get majorities. I've personally proposed describing politics, philosophy, ideology as a protected class under civil rights law, and defining these interactive computer services as public accommodations so that services cannot be denied on the basis of partisan differences. And so this is we need to prevent one-party rule, and the best way to do that basically is not with regulation. It's for people to play in a fair manner and to allow things to to percolate on the internet. There's no reason to censor content. YouTube pulled the Project Veritas video. What they do that for? I mean, oh my goodness, they're criticizing Google. I mean, what, they can't countenance criticism on their own platform? I mean, we all live here, so we're kind of in this together. We need to prevent, censorship. We need to speak out against censorship. We need to say, hey, let's have a free and open internet, and we can all we can have true fairness, which is not going to have censorship, and you're not going to try to demote other content like competitors, and which could invoke antitrust. The more they censor, the more they try to squash small businesses, the greater the calls for regulation are. And Republicans are just going to be like, you know what? Maybe they should be regulated because they're not protecting me. They're not protecting my constituents. And politics is all about protection. Everyone wants to be protected. So there's good ways to do that. There's harmful ways to do that. There's haphazard ways to do that. But people are going to demand protection if they're not being protected, if they're being discriminated against. And so I'll leave you with the close here. We need liberal democracies that foster debate. And then there are one-party systems that demand loyalty to the state. And there's not much room in between. And we don't want one-party systems. And so the alarming trends we're seeing with big tech companies engaging in censorship in the pursuit of fairness look a lot like a bid for one-party rule. And the thing about one-party systems is once you have one, it's really, really hard to get rid of it. And there's no guarantee that your favored class will be represented in its leadership. Sometimes those who support the rise of such a system wind up being marginalized by it. Look no further than Elizabeth Warren to see what lies at the end of that tunnel. Is it worth the risk? Be careful what you wish for. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a great day.